You think you know someone when they smile at your kitchen table every Sunday, when they hug you at family gatherings, when they call you mom with what sounds like genuine affection. You think those moments mean something. You think the years of open doors and extended hands have built a foundation of mutual respect. I thought I was gaining a daughter when my son Marcus brought home Jessica. I thought I was expanding my family circle, creating more love, more connection. I didn't know I was inviting someone into my life who would eventually look at me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience taking up space in a world she was redesigning. The worst part wasn't the money. It wasn't even disrespectful. The worst part was realizing that every kindness I'd shown, every boundary I'd bent, every sacrifice I'd made had been cataloged in her mind, not as love, but as weakness. And maybe that's what happens when you give so freely that people start to believe your generosity is their right. I'm Margaret Chen, and this is the story of how I learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't what you give someone, it's what you choose to take away. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. When Marcus first brought Jessica home to meet me, she arrived carrying a bottle of expensive wine and wearing a nervous smile that made her look younger than her 28 years. It was a crisp October evening in 2019, and I'd spent the entire afternoon preparing his favorite meal, beef stroganoff with homemade noodles, the same recipe my mother had taught me 40 years earlier. "Mrs. Chen," she said, extending the wine bottle with both hands. "Marcus has told me so much about you. Thank you for having me." I liked her immediately. There was something genuine in the way she looked around my Riverside, California home, taking in the family photos clustered on the mantel, the worn but comfortable furniture that had seen 3 decades of holidays and birthday parties. She didn't seem to be judging or calculating. She seemed curious, interested. "Please call me Margaret," I said, taking her coat. "And thank you for the wine. Shall we open it with dinner?" Marcus beamed as he watched us interact. He'd been nervous about this introduction for weeks, calling me twice to make sure I had everything I needed, asking if I wanted him to pick up flowers or dessert. It was sweet, the way he wanted everything to be perfect. During dinner, Jessica asked thoughtful questions about my work as a retired high school counselor, about the neighborhood, about Marcus's childhood. She laughed at my stories about his attempts to build a treehouse that collapsed 3 times before we finally hired someone to help him finish it. She seemed genuinely interested when I mentioned my volunteer work at the local literacy center. "That's amazing," she said, leaning forward. "I've always thought about doing something like that. Do you think they need more volunteers?" I gave her the coordinator's contact information, and she actually followed up the next week. For the first few months, she came with me every other Saturday, working with adults who were learning to read. She was patient, encouraging, never condescending. I watched her help a 50-year-old construction worker sound out words in a children's book, and I thought, this is exactly the kind of woman I hoped Marcus would find. Their relationship moved quickly. By Christmas, she was joining us for family dinners every Sunday. By Valentine's Day, she had a key to Marcus's apartment. By summer, they were talking about moving in together. I was genuinely happy for them. Jessica seemed to bring out the best in my son. He was more confident, more settled. He'd found a partner who challenged him intellectually. She worked in marketing for a tech startup, but who also shared his love of hiking and trying new restaurants. They traveled together, laughed together, and planned together. When they got engaged in the spring of 2021, I cried happy tears. Marcus proposed during a family barbecue in my backyard, getting down on one knee right by the rose bushes his father had planted before he passed away. Jessica's surprise seemed genuine, her joy unmistakable. "I'm so honored to officially become part of this family," she told me that evening, as we cleaned up paper plates and leftover potato salad. "You've raised such an incredible son." I hugged her tight. "I'm honored to have you as a daughter," I replied, and I meant every word. The wedding planning brought us even closer. Jessica included me in every major decision: the venue, the flowers, the menu. She asked for my opinion on dresses, listened thoughtfully when I suggested adding my grandmother's pearl necklace to her jewelry. She even asked me to do a reading during the ceremony. "I want you to feel like this is your day too," she said one afternoon, as we sat in a bridal shop, surrounded by tulle and silk. "You're not just gaining a daughter-in-law. I'm gaining a second mother." I believed her. Looking back now, I wonder if she believed it too, or if she was already playing a longer game than I realized. The wedding itself was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant in a simple but elegant dress that complemented her dark hair and olive skin. Marcus couldn't stop smiling. During the reception, she made a point of introducing me to her friends and family as Marcus's wonderful mother, Margaret, who basically planned half of this wedding. It wasn't true, she'd done most of the work, but it was generous of her to say. Her parents, divorced and remarried to other people, seemed pleasant enough, though I noticed a certain tension in the way they interacted with each other and with Jessica. Her father, Robert, owned a small chain of electronics stores. Her mother, Linda, worked as a real estate agent. Both seemed focused on the networking opportunities the wedding provided, rather than on celebrating their daughter. But I chalked it up to different family dynamics. After the honeymoon, Marcus and Jessica moved into a larger apartment across town. They settled into married life easily, it seemed. Sunday dinners continued at my house, and Jessica appeared to enjoy them. She'd arrive early sometimes to help me cook, staying late to help with dishes. We developed what felt like our own friendship, separate from her relationship with Marcus. She told me about her work stress, her hopes of eventually starting her own marketing consultancy. I shared stories about my years as a counselor, the students I'd helped navigate difficult times. We discovered we both loved mystery novels and started a little two-person book club, meeting for coffee once a month to discuss our latest reads. I started thinking of her not just as my daughter-in-law but as the daughter I'd never had. Marcus was my only child. His father, David, and I had tried for years to have another baby, but it never happened. David passed away from a heart attack when Marcus was 19, so for over a decade, it had just been the two of us. Having Jessica in our family felt like a gift, a chance to experience the mother-daughter relationship I'd always wondered about. 6 months after the wedding, they started talking about buying a house. The apartment was getting cramped, they said, and they wanted space for the family they hoped to have someday. Property values in Riverside had skyrocketed, but Jessica had found a few potential options in their price range. "The only problem," Marcus mentioned during one of our Sunday dinners, "is coming up with the down payment. We're both putting everything we can into savings, but it's still gonna take us at least 2 more years." I didn't say anything that night, but I thought about it all week. I'd been conservative with money since David's death, living below my means and investing wisely. The house was paid off, and I had a substantial nest egg from David's life insurance, my retirement accounts, and careful saving over the years. I was comfortable, more than comfortable. The following Sunday, I brought it up. "What if I helped with the down payment?" I asked. "Consider it an early inheritance." Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. "Mom, that's incredibly generous, but we couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," I said. "I'm offering. I want you two to have a good start. Money sitting in accounts doesn't make anyone happy, but helping my family build their future, that brings me joy." Jessica was quiet for a moment, then reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "Margaret, are you sure? That's such a huge gift." "I'm sure," I said. "The only condition is that you find a house with a mother-in-law suite or at least a guest room where I can visit sometimes." They both laughed. "Deal," Jessica said. We shook on it, and the next week I transferred $85,000 to their account. It was enough for a 20% down payment on most of the houses they'd been considering, plus closing costs. I felt good about it. Useful, like I was investing in the future I wanted for my family. "It's perfect," Jessica said as we walked through it for the second time. "Can't you just picture Christmas mornings here? Sunday dinners in that kitchen?" The first few months in the new house were wonderful. They hosted Thanksgiving, and Jessica spent days preparing a menu that included all of Marcus's favorites: plus a few new dishes she wanted to try. She insisted I arrive early to help, though she'd clearly planned everything perfectly. "I'm so nervous," she confided as we peeled potatoes together. "I want everyone to have a good time. I want to prove I can do this." "You're already doing it," I assured her. "And even if something goes wrong, it doesn't matter. We're family, we're just happy to be together." "You're so lucky to have such a wonderful daughter-in-law," her mother Linda told me as we cleaned up later. "Jessica's always been good at making a house feel like a home." I agreed wholeheartedly, watching Jessica laugh with Marcus's cousins, seeing her fuss over making sure everyone had enough to eat. I felt proud of the woman my son had chosen, and grateful for the expansion of our little family. Christmas was even better. Jessica had decorated the house like something out of a magazine. Garlands on the staircase, a perfectly coordinated tree, thoughtful gifts for everyone. She gave me a beautiful silk scarf and a framed photo of the three of us from Thanksgiving. "For the best mother-in-law anyone could ask for," the inscription read. I treasured it, placed it on my nightstand where I could see it every morning when I woke up. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now back to where we left off. As 2022 progressed, I noticed small changes in our dynamic, but I attributed them to the natural adjustment of settling into their new life. Sunday dinners became a little less frequent. Sometimes they had other plans, which was normal for a young couple. Jessica seemed busier with work, more focused on her career goals. She still called me regularly, but the conversations grew shorter. When I suggested our monthly book club coffee dates, she'd often need to reschedule. When I offered to help with house projects, she'd thank me but say they had it handled. "They're just finding their rhythm," I told myself. "This is what healthy independence looks like." But sometimes, when I was at their house for dinner, I'd catch Jessica looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not hostile, but not warm either. Calculating, maybe, like she was seeing me differently than she had before. The first real crack in our relationship came that summer, during a family barbecue at their house. Marcus's cousin Tony brought his new girlfriend, a bubbly 25-year-old named Sarah, who asked a lot of questions about everyone's lives. "So Margaret," Sarah said as we sat on the back patio, "do you live nearby?" Sarah laughed. "That's smart. My boyfriend's mom lives 3 hours away and she's always complaining she doesn't see him enough. You must love having them so close." Before I could answer, Jessica spoke up from the kitchen doorway where she'd been bringing out more drinks. "Oh, Margaret practically lives here anyway," she said with a laugh that sounded forced. Sometimes I joke that we should just move her into the guest room permanently. Everyone chuckled, but something in her tone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't said with affection. It was said with the kind of edge that makes a joke feel like a complaint. Marcus didn't seem to notice, but I filed the comment away, a small seed of unease that I tried to ignore. Over the following months, similar comments became more frequent. Little jokes about how often I visited, how much I helped with things they could handle themselves, how I always had opinions about their decorating choices or meal planning. Margaret's very involved. I heard her tell someone on the phone one day when I was in their kitchen getting a glass of water. She didn't know I could hear her from the hallway. She means well, but sometimes it's a lot. I stood there for a moment, glass in hand, trying to process what I'd heard. Was I too involved? I'd thought I was being helpful, supportive. I'd thought they appreciated my presence in their lives. That night, I lay in bed replaying every interaction from the past few months, looking for signs I'd missed. Had I been overstepping? Was I the overbearing mother-in-law I'd always promised myself I'd never become? I decided to pull back a little, give them more space. I stopped dropping by unannounced, waited for invitations instead of extending them. I let a few more weeks pass between phone calls. When Jessica mentioned a house project, I didn't immediately offer to help. But the distance I created seemed to make things worse, not better. Now, instead of being too involved, I was apparently too distant. "You've been so quiet lately," Jessica said during one of our infrequent phone calls. "Is everything okay?" Everything's fine, I assured her. Just trying to give you two some space to settle into married life. Well, don't become a stranger, she said, but again something in her tone suggested she didn't entirely mean it. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, never quite finding the right balance between involved and distant, helpful and intrusive. Every interaction felt measured, careful, like I was being evaluated on some criteria I didn't understand. By the end of 2022, I realized that the easy, warm relationship Jessica and I had shared was gone. In its place was something more polite, more formal. She still called me Mom and hugged me at family gatherings, but the spontaneity was missing. The genuine affection had been replaced by something that felt more like performance. Marcus didn't seem to notice the change, or if he did, he didn't mention it. He was wrapped up in his own career advancement and seemed happy enough with the surface-level family harmony we maintained. But I felt the shift keenly, a cold current running beneath the warm facade we all pretended was real. The shift became impossible to ignore when Jessica started working from home 3 days a week in early 2023. Her marketing company had embraced remote work, and she'd converted their spare bedroom into a sleek home office. Modern desk, ergonomic chair, ring lights for video calls. She'd spared no expense creating her professional sanctuary. What I didn't expect was how my presence in their home would suddenly become a liability to her image. The first incident happened on a Tuesday morning in February. I'd stopped by to drop off some homemade soup for Marcus, who'd been fighting a cold. I had my own key. They'd given it to me when they moved in, insisting I should feel free to come and go as family. I knocked first, as I always did, then let myself in when no one answered. I was ladling the soup into containers in their kitchen when I heard Jessica's voice carrying from the office upstairs. She was on a video call, her tone bright and professional. "Sorry about that background noise," she said with a laugh. "My mother-in-law just let herself in. She has this habit of showing up unannounced." I froze, ladle suspended over the pot. Mother-in-law, not Margaret, not Mom. And the way she said it, like I was some intrusive stranger rather than family. I finished with the soup, quietly, left a note explaining it was for Marcus's cold, and slipped out, but her words echoed in my head. For days, had I really been showing up unannounced? I thought back through my recent visits. I always called first, or came at times we'd agreed upon, or brought something specific they'd mentioned needing. The next week, I decided to test my theory. I called before coming over. "Hi Jessica, is now a good time? I wanted to bring those garden magazines I mentioned." "Actually, I'm in back-to-back meetings, until 5, she said. "Maybe this weekend." I tried again later in the week. "Would Thursday work for a quick visit?" "Thursday's really packed. How about I call you when things calm down?" She didn't call. When I mentioned it to Marcus during one of our increasingly rare father-son phone conversations, he seemed surprised. "That's weird, Mom. She's usually done with work by 4 on Thursdays. Maybe she's just stressed about this big campaign she's working on." I wanted to believe that. I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, to remember that work pressures can make anyone short-tempered, but the pattern continued. My visits became increasingly unwelcome, my calls less frequently returned. The breaking point came during Easter preparation. I'd volunteered to host the holiday dinner, as I had for the past several years. Marcus and Jessica were bringing the wine and dessert. Her parents would be there, along with Marcus's cousins and their families. About 12 people total. 3 days before Easter, Jessica called with a change of plans. "Margaret, I hope you don't mind, but we've decided to host Easter at our place this year. Our dining room is bigger, and I've been wanting to try out some new recipes." I minded very much, but I tried to keep my voice neutral. "Of course, honey. What can I bring?" "Oh, just yourself. I've got everything covered." Everything is covered. As if the holiday meal I'd been planning and shopping for didn't matter. As if my contribution wasn't needed or wanted. I arrived at their house on Easter Sunday with a simple side salad. The only thing Jessica had reluctantly agreed to let me bring after I insisted on contributing something. The house looked stunning. Jessica had outdone herself with the decorations, the table setting, the menu, everything was Pinterest perfect. But as the afternoon wore on, I began to notice how I was being positioned in the family dynamic. When Jessica's father Robert complimented the beautiful table, she graciously accepted the praise without mentioning that I'd taught her how to fold those napkins. When her mother Linda raved about the perfectly cooked ham, Jessica shared her cooking technique without acknowledging that it was my recipe. Most telling was the conversation that happened while we were clearing dishes. Jessica's mother and I were in the kitchen together, loading the dishwasher, when Linda made an observation. "Jessica has really grown into such a wonderful hostess," she said. "You must be so proud of how she's taken over the family traditions." Taken over. The phrase stung, but I managed to smile. She's very talented. It's nice that she's establishing herself as the matriarch of this side of the family, Linda continued, apparently oblivious to how her words might sound to the actual matriarch she was speaking to. Young women today are so much better at entertaining than our generation was. I bit my tongue and continued loading plates, but I couldn't help wondering if Linda's comments reflected conversations she'd had with Jessica. Was this part of some larger narrative Jessica was crafting? The competent young wife stepping up to fill a void left by an aging, outdated mother-in-law. After everyone left that evening, I offered to help with the remaining cleanup. Jessica declined, saying she and Marcus had it handled. As I gathered my purse and the empty salad bowl I'd brought, I overheard a snippet of conversation between Jessica and Marcus in the kitchen. "Your mom seemed a little quiet today," Marcus said. "She's probably tired," Jessica replied. "You know how older people get overwhelmed by big gatherings." Older people. As if I were some fragile elderly woman who couldn't handle a family dinner, rather than someone who'd been hosting these same gatherings for decades. I drove home in silence, trying to sort through my feelings. Was Jessica intentionally pushing me to the margins, or was I being oversensitive? Was this normal daughter-in-law behavior, establishing her own place in the family hierarchy, or something more calculated? The answer came a few weeks later. During what should have been a pleasant shopping trip, Jessica had mentioned wanting to redecorate their guest bedroom, the one I stayed in when I visited overnight. She asked if I wanted to come along to look at furniture and fabric samples. I was delighted by the invitation, hopeful that our relationship might be finding its footing again. We spent the morning browsing through a high-end home goods store, discussing color schemes and furniture styles. Jessica seemed relaxed, more like her old self. We even shared a laugh over some ridiculously overpriced throw pillows. It was while we were waiting in line to pay for fabric samples that I overheard her phone conversation. She'd stepped a few feet away to take a call, but her voice carried in the quiet store. "Yeah, I'm here with Marcus's mom," she said, her tone shifting to something more conspiratorial. "We're picking out stuff for the guest room. Hopefully something that will encourage shorter visits, if you know what I mean." The person on the other end must have said something amusing, because Jessica laughed. "Exactly. Maybe if the room is less comfortable, she won't be so inclined to extend her stay." I stood there holding fabric samples for a room that was apparently being redesigned specifically to make me less welcome. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't about decorating, it was about erasing my presence from their home, making me feel unwanted without having to actually say so. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment to compose myself. When I returned, Jessica was finishing her purchase, chatting cheerfully with the saleswoman about paint colors. "Ready to grab lunch?" she asked as if nothing had happened. I begged off, claiming a sudden headache. It wasn't entirely a lie. I did feel sick, just not in the way she'd assume. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I started keeping a record of our interactions, writing down dates and details of conversations, noting patterns in Jessica's behavior. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I needed to see if my perceptions were accurate or if I was losing perspective. The evidence was undeniable. Over the following months, my journal filled with small slights, subtle dismissals, and increasingly obvious attempts to minimize my role in their lives. Jessica stopped including me in house projects, claiming she and Marcus preferred to handle things themselves. She canceled our book club meetings repeatedly, always with plausible excuses, but never with alternative suggestions. When I offered to babysit their friends' children during a dinner party, she politely declined, saying they'd hired a professional sitter. Most hurtfully, she began editing me out of family stories. When new friends asked how she and Marcus had afforded their beautiful house so young, she'd talk about their careful savings and smart financial planning. The $85,000 down payment I'd provided was never mentioned. When someone complimented their garden, Jessica would describe her research into native plants and soil preparation. The hours I'd spent helping her plan the layout and teaching her my mother's techniques for growing roses were erased from the narrative. I was becoming a ghost in my own family story, present but unacknowledged, helpful but invisible. The realization crystallized during their first wedding anniversary celebration in May 2023. They'd planned a small dinner party with close friends and family. I arrived with a beautifully wrapped gift, a vintage crystal vase I'd found at an antique shop, similar to one Jessica had admired at a museum months earlier. The evening started pleasantly enough. Jessica had prepared an elegant meal, and the conversation flowed easily among the 8 guests. But as the night progressed, I noticed how I was being introduced and referenced. "This is Marcus's mom, Margaret," Jessica would say to new acquaintances, rather than, "This is my mother-in-law," or "This is Mom." The distinction was subtle but pointed. I was Marcus's family, not hers. When someone asked how they'd met, Jessica told the story with vivid detail: the coffee shop encounter, their first date, the gradual realization that they were perfect for each other. But when the same person asked about their wedding, Jessica's account focused on the vendors, the venue, the dress, the reading I'd done during the ceremony, the family traditions we'd incorporated, the months of planning we'd shared. None of it made it into her version. I felt like I was disappearing in real time, being edited out of moments I'd helped create. The final straw came during the gift opening. Jessica opened my carefully chosen vase and held it up with a bright smile. "Oh, how lovely! Thank you, Margaret." But when her maid of honor asked where she planned to display it, Jessica's response chilled me. "I'm not sure yet. It's very traditional. I'll have to find the right spot for it." Traditional. The word hung in the air like a judgment. Not beautiful, not thoughtful, not meaningful, traditional. Code for old-fashioned, outdated, irrelevant. I watched her set the vase aside with the same careful politeness she might show to an unwanted gift from a distant relative. In that moment, I understood that I had become exactly that to her. A distant relative whose gestures were tolerated rather than treasured. After the guests left, I helped carry dishes to the kitchen despite Jessica's protests that I didn't need to. I was looking for a moment to connect with her, to see if I could bridge whatever gap had opened between us. "The dinner was beautiful," I said genuinely. "You're such a natural hostess." "Thank you," she replied, focused on loading the dishwasher. "I've been practicing. I remember when you were so nervous about that first Thanksgiving." I continued, hoping to remind her of our earlier closeness. "Now look at you. Entertaining like you've been doing it for years." Jessica paused, her hands still on the dishes. For a moment, I thought I saw something soften in her expression. But then she straightened up, her smile polite but distant. "Well, everyone has to learn sometime," she said. "I guess I just figured it out." Figured it out. Not you taught me or I learned from watching you. She had figured it out on her own, her success having nothing to do with the guidance and encouragement I'd provided. I drove home that night feeling more isolated than I had since David's death. At least when I'd been alone, I'd known where I stood. This liminal space, not quite rejected but no longer embraced, was far more painful than honest solitude. That summer, I made one last attempt to restore our relationship. I suggested a weekend trip, just the two of us, a spa retreat I'd seen advertised, or maybe a shopping trip to Los Angeles. Something to give us time away from the daily dynamics and distractions. "That's so sweet of you to think of," Jessica said when I proposed it. "But things are just crazy busy right now with work. Maybe later in the year?" Later never came. Instead, I watched from an increasing distance as Jessica built a social life that had no space for me. She and Marcus joined a young professionals group, started hosting game nights with other couples their age, and took weekend trips with friends I'd never met. When I asked Marcus about these new activities during one of our phone calls, he seemed genuinely surprised by my interest. "I thought you knew about all that stuff, Mom. Jess posts about it on social media all the time." I didn't have social media, something Jessica knew perfectly well. It was another way of keeping me informed without actually having to include me. By August, I'd accepted that the relationship I'd thought we shared was gone, possibly had never been real in the first place. Jessica had gotten what she needed from me: financial help, domestic guidance, acceptance into the family. Now that she was established, I have excess baggage. But I wasn't prepared for what was coming next. I wasn't prepared for the day I would overhear her true feelings about my place in their lives, spoken with a casual cruelty that would change everything between us forever. As autumn approached, I found myself dreading family gatherings for the first time in my life. The thought of sitting through another meal where I was present, but irrelevant, acknowledged but not valued, filled me with a bone-deep exhaustion I'd never experienced before. I was about to learn that exhaustion was the least of my problems. I started to wonder if I'd been naive about Jessica's feelings toward me. Had she ever genuinely cared about our relationship, or had I been useful to her in ways I was only now beginning to understand? The down payment, the furniture, the constant availability to help with projects and provide emotional support, had I been an investment rather than family? The thought made me feel foolish, used in a way I'd never experienced before, but I pushed it aside, telling myself I was being paranoid, that every family goes through adjustment periods. I had no idea how much worse things were about to get. The moment that shattered everything happened on a humid Thursday afternoon in September. I'd stopped by their house to water the plants while they were away at a business conference in San Diego. Jessica had asked me to do this favor herself, which I'd taken as a small olive branch in our increasingly strained relationship. I was in their kitchen, rinsing out the watering can, when I heard voices coming from the back patio. Jessica and Marcus had returned early from their trip, and Jessica was on the phone with someone while Marcus unloaded luggage from the car. I started to call out a greeting, but something in Jessica's tone made me pause. She was speaking quietly, but the kitchen window was open, and her voice carried clearly across the still air. "I swear, Linda, living with this constant oversight is driving me insane," she was saying. "She has keys to our house, she shows up whenever she wants. She has opinions about everything we do." I realized she was talking to her mother. My hand froze on the faucet handle. "No, Marcus doesn't see it," Jessica continued. "He thinks she's just being helpful, but it's like having a surveillance system that also gives unsolicited advice. And the guilt trips when we don't include her in every little thing. It's exhausting." My chest tightened. I told myself to walk away, to make my presence known, to do anything other than keep listening. But I couldn't move. The worst part is she acts like she owns the place because she helped with the down payment. Jessica said, her voice rising slightly with frustration. Like that gives her the right to waltz in whenever she pleases and treat this like her second home. Each word hit me like a physical blow. The down payment I'd given freely, joyfully, as an investment in their future. She saw it as a weapon I was using against them. I know, Jessica said, apparently responding to something her mother had said. "Marcus keeps saying I should be grateful, and I am. But there's a difference between being grateful and being suffocated." She's like, "God, this sounds terrible," but she's like a dead weight we're dragging around. We can't make any decisions without considering how it will affect her feelings. We can't have friends over without wondering if she'll pop in. We can't even redecorate our own home without her input. Dead weight. The words rang in my ears like a bell that wouldn't stop tolling. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles white against the stainless steel. "She had her time to be the center of a family," Jessica continued, her voice growing more animated as she warmed to her topic. "Now it's our turn. But she can't seem to accept that. It's like she expects us to replace the relationship she had with Marcus, and that's just not healthy for anyone. I heard Marcus's voice in the background asking something I couldn't make out. "Just my mom," Jessica called back to him. Then, lowering her voice again, "I have to go. But yes, we're definitely going to have to set some boundaries. I can't keep pretending this is normal." I heard the patio door slide open and quickly turned on the faucet, busying myself with filling the watering can. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it steady. "Margaret?" Jessica's voice came from behind me, bright and cheerful. "I didn't know you were here." I turned around slowly, trying to arrange my face into something resembling normalcy. "Just finishing up with the plants. You're back early." "The flight got in ahead of schedule," she said, her smile never wavering. "How were the orchids?" I was worried about them in this heat. "They're fine," I managed. "All watered and happy." "You're such a lifesaver," Jessica said, and the casual use of that phrase, lifesaver, when moments before she'd called me deadweight, felt like salt in an open wound. I gathered my things quickly, mumbling something about traffic and needing to get home. Marcus appeared from the garage as I was leaving, his face lighting up when he saw me. "Hey, Mom, thanks for taking care of everything. How about staying for dinner?" Jess picked up some great wine and Napa. "I can't tonight," I said, avoiding his eyes. "But thank you." I could feel Jessica watching me carefully, perhaps wondering if I seemed different, if I'd overheard anything. But I kept my expression neutral, hugged them both goodbye, and walked to my car with measured steps. It wasn't until I was safely in my own driveway that I allowed myself to fall apart. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, crying harder than I had since David's funeral. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of humiliation, of betrayal, of the peculiar agony that comes from learning how someone really sees you when they think you're not listening. Dead weight. The phrase played on repeat in my mind as I finally made it inside my house. I poured myself a glass of wine I didn't want, and sat in my living room staring at the family photos that suddenly seemed like evidence of my own delusion. Had I really been that intrusive? I thought back through the past 2 years, trying to see my actions through Jessica's eyes. The Sunday dinners I'd assumed they enjoyed, had they felt obligated to attend. The advice I'd offered about everything from gardening to career decisions, had it felt like interference rather than support. The keys to their house, given freely and with love, did Jessica see them as an invasion of her privacy rather than a symbol of trust? I felt sick thinking about all the times I'd let myself in, all the spontaneous visits, all the ways I'd made myself at home in what I thought was a welcoming space. Through Jessica's lens, I wasn't family. I was an overbearing intruder who couldn't take a hint. But what haunted me most was the casual way she'd discussed me with her mother. Not with anger or frustration, but with the weary resignation of someone discussing a persistent problem they'd learned to tolerate. I wasn't even worth getting upset about anymore. I was just an annoying fact of life to be managed. That night, I called my sister Claire in Portland. We'd grown closer since David's death, talking every few weeks and visiting each other a couple times a year. She was the only person I felt I could trust with the truth of what was happening. "Margaret." "Honey, what's wrong?" she said immediately upon hearing my voice. "You sound terrible." I told her everything, not just what I'd overheard that afternoon, but the months of gradual exclusion, the subtle changes in how Jessica treated me, the growing sense that I was no longer welcome in the family I'd helped build. Claire listened without interrupting, occasionally making small sounds of sympathy or outrage. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, sweetheart," she finally said. "I'm so sorry. What an awful thing to overhear." "The worst part is wondering if she's right," I said. "Have I been too involved? Have I been suffocating them without realizing it?" "Margaret, listen to me," Claire said firmly. "You gave them $85,000 for their house. You've been nothing but supportive and loving. You've respected their marriage and their independence. What you've described isn't overbearing behavior, it's normal family involvement. But maybe normal is too much for her," I said. Maybe she needs more space than I realized. Then she should have had an honest conversation with you about boundaries, Claire replied. Not smile to your face while complaining about you behind your back. And calling you dead weight? That's just cruel, Margaret. You don't deserve that. We talked for another hour, with Claire helping me process what I'd heard and what it meant for my relationship with Marcus and Jessica going forward. By the time we hung up, I felt clearer about one thing. I couldn't pretend I hadn't heard what I'd heard. The knowledge would poison every future interaction, every smile, every hug. The question was what to do with that knowledge. Over the weekend, I avoided their calls. Jessica texted twice asking if I was okay, saying I'd seemed quiet when I left on Thursday. The false concern in her messages made my stomach turn. Marcus called and left a voicemail inviting me to their usual Sunday dinner. I didn't respond to either of them. Instead, I spent the weekend thinking, walking through my neighborhood, sitting in my garden trying to decide how to move forward. Monday morning, I made an appointment with my lawyer, Thomas Bradley. He'd handled David's estate and my will updates over the years, and I trusted his judgment. I told him I needed to review my estate planning documents. Is everything all right, Margaret? He asked when I explained I wanted to make some changes. This seems rather sudden. I didn't go into details, just said that my family situation had evolved and I wanted my will to reflect my current wishes. Thomas scheduled a comprehensive review for the following week. That same day, I also made an appointment with my financial advisor, Patricia Wong. If I was going to make significant changes to my estate planning, I wanted to understand all my options. By Tuesday, I still hadn't responded to Marcus and Jessica's messages. Jessica called that evening, her voice bright but with an edge of concern. Margaret, is everything okay? We haven't heard from you since Thursday, and you missed Sunday dinner without saying anything. Marcus is starting to worry. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd called me deadweight was now worried about my absence. I'm fine, I said simply, just dealing with some personal matters. Is there anything we can help with? Jessica asked, and I had to admire her acting ability. She sounded genuinely caring. No, but thank you for asking. There was a pause. Well, if you need anything at all, you know we're here for you, your family. Family. Another word that apparently meant something very different to her than it did to me. After I hung up, I found myself thinking about that phrase, your family. In Jessica's mind, did family mean someone you loved and supported, or someone you tolerated out of obligation? Someone you included, or someone you managed? The answer had been clear in her conversation with her mother. I was family in the sense that she was stuck with me, not in the sense that she valued my presence in her life. Wednesday brought another call from Marcus, this one more direct. Mom, what's going on? Jess said you sounded weird on the phone, and you've been MIA all week. Are you sick? Are you upset about something? I could hear the genuine concern in his voice, and it made my heart ache. Marcus loved me. I knew that. But he was also clearly oblivious to his wife's true feelings about me. How could I explain what I'd overheard without putting him in an impossible position between his mother and his wife? I'm just taking some time to think about things, I said carefully. Nothing for you to worry about. Think about what things? Mom, you're scaring me. This isn't like you. He was right. It wasn't like me. The old Margaret would have smoothed things over, made excuses, found a way to minimize the conflict and restore peace. But the old Margaret hadn't known she was dead weight. I'm fine, Marcus. I just need some space right now. Space from what? From us? The hurt in his voice was real, and I felt terrible for causing it. But I also felt something I'd never experienced before in relation to my son, a protective weariness. He was Jessica's husband first, my son second. His loyalty was to her, as it should be, but that meant I couldn't trust him with the truth of what I'd learned. Just space in general, I said. I'll call you soon. Okay? That Thursday, I met with Thomas Bradley to review my will. The document was straightforward. Marcus inherited everything, with the understanding that he would care for any future grandchildren and make sure Jessica was provided for as well. It was the kind of will most parents have, assuming that their children's spouses are extensions of their own family. What changes are you considering? Thomas asked, pulling out my file. I took a deep breath. I want to remove Jessica from any inheritance considerations. She should receive nothing directly, and I want to structure Marcus's inheritance so that she can't access it. Thomas raised his eyebrows. That's quite a significant change. May I ask what prompted this? Let's just say I've gained some clarity about family dynamics. I said, I want to make sure my assets go to people who value what I've built, not to someone who sees me as a burden. Thomas asked careful questions about my reasoning, ensuring I was making this decision with a clear mind and full understanding of the implications. I assured him I was. I'll draft some options for you, he said finally. A trust structure that provides for Marcus, while limiting Jessica's access, and perhaps some charitable bequests as well. Will you be telling them about these changes? Eventually, I said, but not yet. That weekend, I finally agreed to have dinner with Marcus and Jessica. I couldn't avoid them forever, and I needed to see if I could manage normal interactions knowing what I now knew. They were both overly solicitous, clearly worried about my week of silence. Jessica had prepared my favorite meal, herb-crusted salmon with roasted vegetables. She asked about my health, my activities, whether anything was bothering me. I played my part, assuring them I was fine, apologizing for being out of touch, making small talk about the weather and current events. But I felt like I was watching the evening from outside myself, studying their behavior with new eyes. Jessica's performance was flawless. She laughed at my stories, asked follow-up questions, complimented my earrings. If I hadn't overheard her true feelings, I would have thought we were back to our old closeness. But I had heard, and knowing that every smile was calculated, every kindness strategic, made the entire evening feel surreal. As I drove home that night, I realized something had fundamentally shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required caring what someone thought of you. Instead, I felt a cold clarity I'd never experienced before. Jessica wanted me to be dead weight. She wanted me out of their lives but was too polite to say so directly. I could arrange that, but it would be on my terms, not hers. The next morning, I called Thomas Bradley and told him to proceed with the new will. Then I began planning the rest of my response. Carefully, quietly, and with the same strategic thinking Jessica had been using against me. If she thought I was dead weight now, she was about to discover what real absence felt like. The new will was finalized on a crisp October morning. I sat in Thomas Bradley's office, my signature still wet on the documents that would reshape my family's future, and felt nothing but calm satisfaction. The charitable trusts were established, the restrictions on Jessica's access were ironclad, and Marcus would inherit a legacy that reflected my true values, not the obligation Jessica seemed to think he owed her. But removing Jessica from my will was only the beginning. Over the past month, I'd been quietly implementing what I called my strategic withdrawal, a carefully orchestrated reduction of my presence in their lives that would give Jessica exactly what she'd told her mother she wanted. No more spontaneous visits, no more helpful phone calls, no more volunteering for babysitting, house-sitting, or plant watering duties. If Jessica wanted independence from my oversight, she was about to get more independence than she'd bargained for. The first test came when their dishwasher broke in late October. Marcus called me on a Wednesday evening, frustration clear in his voice. "Mom, our dishwasher just started leaking everywhere. There's water all over the kitchen floor. Do you know any good repair companies? You always seem to know the best people for everything." The old Margaret would have immediately offered the name of the reliable repair service I'd used for years, probably would have called them herself to expedite the appointment, might have even offered to come over and help clean up the water. The new Margaret chose her words carefully. "That's frustrating," I said sympathetically. "Have you tried looking online for reviews? That's probably your best bet for finding someone reputable." There was a pause. "Oh, okay. I just thought, You usually have recommendations for this kind of thing. I'm sure you and Jessica can figure it out, I replied cheerfully. You're both so capable. I could hear the confusion in his voice when he said goodbye. He'd expected the kind of immediate, comprehensive help I'd always provided. Instead, he got polite encouragement to handle things himself. 2 days later, Jessica called. Her tone was friendly but slightly strained. Margaret, Marcus mentioned the dishwasher situation. I know you probably have the number for that repair guy you've used before. Could you share it? We're getting quotes from several places. I don't have that information handy. I lied smoothly, but I'm sure you'll find someone good. Another pause. Okay. Well, if you think of anyone, could you let us know? Of course, I said with no intention of following through. They ended up hiring a company that charged them twice what my reliable guy would have, took 3 times as long to get the parts, and did mediocre work. I heard about their frustration through Marcus's complaints during our increasingly brief phone conversations. But I offered no solutions. November brought their 5-year house anniversary, a milestone they'd mentioned wanting to celebrate with a small party. In previous years, I would have volunteered to help with planning, cooking, or setup. This time, I waited to see if I'd even be invited. The invitation came 3 days before the event, clearly an afterthought. We're having a few people over Saturday to celebrate 5 years in the house, Jessica said during a brief phone call. Nothing fancy, just drinks and appetizers. Would you like to come? That sounds lovely, I replied. What time? 7-ish. And don't worry about bringing anything. We've got it all covered. Of course they did. They'd gotten so used to my contributions that they'd planned the entire event without even considering what I might offer. The dismissal was casual, automatic. I arrived at 7:30, fashionably late for the first time in my life. The party was in full swing. About 15 people scattered between the kitchen and living room, wine glasses in hand, animated conversations flowing. Jessica had clearly put considerable effort into the preparations. The house looked magazine perfect, the food was beautifully presented, and she was playing hostess with practiced ease. What struck me immediately was how peripheral my presence felt. In the past, I would have arrived early to help, stayed late to clean up, been involved in greeting guests and facilitating conversations. Tonight, I was simply another guest, and not a particularly important one. Jessica introduced me to the people I hadn't met before with polite efficiency. This is Marcus's mother, Margaret. Not my mother-in-law, or part of our family. Just Marcus's mother, a biological relationship that had nothing to do with her. I found myself grouped with the older guests. A couple in their 60s who lived down the street, and someone's visiting aunt from Phoenix. We were positioned near the kitchen island while the younger, more interesting guests clustered around the living room where Jessica held court. The division wasn't accidental. Jessica was orchestrating the evening's social dynamics, and she'd clearly decided where I fit in the hierarchy. I was furniture again, familiar background that could be acknowledged without being engaged. Halfway through the evening, I excused myself to use the restroom. As I walked down the hallway, I passed the guest bedroom, my former domain when I stayed overnight. The door was ajar, and I could see that Jessica had followed through on her redecorating plans. The warm, comfortable space I'd helped design was now sleek and minimalist, with a firm-looking daybed instead of the queen-size bed that had once welcomed longer visits. The message was clear. Overnight stays were no longer encouraged. When I returned to the party, I overheard a conversation that confirmed my growing understanding of how Jessica positioned me in their social circle. "Your house is absolutely beautiful," a woman was saying to Jessica. "How did you manage to afford something this nice so young?" "We saved aggressively and got lucky with the market timing," Jessica replied smoothly. "Marcus has a great job in software engineering, and my marketing business has been growing steadily. We were really disciplined about our spending in our 20s. No mention of the down payment that had made their purchase possible, no acknowledgement of the financial foundation I'd provided. Their success was entirely self-made in Jessica's narrative. I sipped my wine and listened to her rewrite history with casual confidence. The generous mother-in-law who'd helped launch their life together had been edited out completely, replaced by a story of young love and financial responsibility. Later that evening, as the party was winding down, I made my exit quietly. I thanked Jessica for a lovely evening, hugged Marcus goodbye, and slipped out while cleanup was beginning. No offer to help with dishes, no lingering to ensure everything was handled. I was learning to be a guest in their lives rather than family. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Over the following weeks, I could sense Marcus's growing confusion about my changed behavior. Our phone calls became shorter and less frequent. When he suggested dinner plans, I was often busy with other commitments, book club meetings, volunteer work, social activities I was cultivating to fill the time I'd previously devoted to their family. "You seem really busy lately, Mom," he commented during one of our brief conversations. "Everything okay?" "Everything's wonderful," I said. Truthfully, I'm just exploring some new interests, and I was. Without the constant availability I'd maintained for Marcus and Jessica's needs, I discovered I had time for pursuits I'd neglected for years. I joined a hiking group for seniors, started taking pottery classes, and volunteered with a literacy program at the local library. My calendar was fuller than it had been in years, but with activities that brought me genuine satisfaction rather than the hollow duty I'd been feeling with family obligations. The real test of my strategic withdrawal came in early December, when Jessica's father Robert had a minor heart attack. Jessica called me, her voice tight with stress and exhaustion. "Margaret, I know this is short notice, but I'm flying to Phoenix to be with my dad. He's stable, but Mom's a wreck, and I need to help coordinate his care. Marcus can get time off work right now because of year-end deadlines. Would you be able to stay at the house while I'm gone, just to keep an eye on things, and maybe walk through once a day?" The old Margaret would have immediately rearranged her schedule, canceled her own plans, and provided whatever support was needed. The new Margaret consulted her calendar and discovered she had commitments. "I'm so sorry to hear about your father," I said genuinely. "I hope he recovers quickly. Unfortunately, I'm not available to house sit. I have pottery classes Tuesday and Thursday, book club Wednesday, and hiking plans for the weekend. But I'm sure you'll figure something out." The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. "Oh," Jessica finally said. I assumed, okay, I'll figure something else out. I'm sure Marcus can manage checking on the house between his work schedule," I suggested helpfully. "Or maybe you could ask one of your neighbors." "Right. Yes. Of course." Jessica's voice had taken on a quality I'd never heard before, something between disappointment and bewilderment. "Thanks anyway." After we hung up, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me felt guilty for not helping during a genuine family crisis. But a larger part of me felt satisfied that Jessica was finally experiencing what it was like to need support that wasn't automatically forthcoming. She ended up asking their neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, to keep an eye on the house. Mrs. Patterson, a retiree in her 70s, was happy to help but couldn't provide the comprehensive care I would have. When Jessica returned from Phoenix a week later, she came home to discover that a pipe had burst in their guest bathroom, flooding the floor and requiring emergency repairs. Marcus called me after the crisis was resolved, his voice strained with stress and exhaustion. "Mom, it was a nightmare. Water everywhere, contractors charging weekend emergency rates, insurance paperwork. Jess is already dealing with her dad's medical situation, and now this. I kept thinking how much easier it would have been if you'd been watching the house. You would have caught the problem before it got so bad." "That does sound stressful," I sympathized. "But these things happen. At least you got it handled." "Yeah, but it cost us almost $3,000 in repairs and deductible payments. Money we don't really have right now with Jess's travel expenses and missing work." I made appropriate sympathetic noises, but offered no solutions. No suggestions for financial help, no offers to research contractors for future reference, no practical assistance of any kind. The conversation ended awkwardly, with Marcus clearly expecting more from me than polite concern. But I was done being the solution to every problem, especially for a daughter-in-law who considered me dead weight. Christmas planning season arrived, and for the first time in years, I didn't automatically volunteer to host or coordinate family gatherings. When Marcus called in mid-December to discuss holiday plans, I could hear the assumption in his voice that I'd be organizing everything as usual. "So what are you thinking for Christmas dinner, Mom? Your place or ours? And should we do the same menu as last year?" "I haven't made any plans yet," I said truthfully. "What are you and Jessica thinking?" There was a pause. "Well, we just assumed. I mean, you always handle Christmas dinner." "I have in the past," I agreed, "but I'm considering other options this year. My friend, Patricia, invited me to join her family celebration, and Claire mentioned she'd love to have me visit in Portland." The panic in Marcus's voice was immediate. "But Mom, it's Christmas. We're family. We spend Christmas together." "Of course we're family," I said calmly. "But that doesn't mean I have to be the one organizing everything every year. You and Jessica are perfectly capable of hosting if you want to maintain the tradition." We've never planned something like that before. You always take care of everything." "Then it sounds like a good learning experience," I replied cheerfully. "I'm sure whatever you decide will be lovely." After that conversation, my phone was quiet for 3 days. Then Jessica called, her voice carefully controlled. "Margaret, Marcus told me about your Christmas plans. We'd really like you to join us for dinner, whether it's at your house or ours. Would you be willing to reconsider?" "That's very kind," I said. "But I've already committed to other plans." "What other plans?" she asked, and I could hear the first note of genuine concern in her voice. "I'm spending Christmas week in Portland with my sister Claire," I said. "We're going to explore the holiday markets and maybe take a trip to the coast." "I'm really looking forward to it." Another long pause. "But Christmas has always been a family time for us." The irony was delicious. The woman who'd called me dead weight was now insisting on the importance of family time. "It will still be family time," I said pleasantly. "You and Marcus can create whatever traditions feel right for your household. And Claire is family too. She's my sister, of course. But I just meant—" "I know what you meant," I said gently, "and I appreciate the invitation. But my plans are set." That evening, Marcus called back, his voice tight with frustration and something that might have been panic. "Mom, what's going on? First you're too busy to help when Jess's dad was sick. Now you're bailing on Christmas. This isn't like you. Maybe you're just seeing a different side of me," I suggested. "I'm not bailing on anything. I'm making choices about how I want to spend my time and energy." "But we need you," he said. And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting to hear. "We don't know how to do holidays without you. We don't know how to do a lot of things without you." "Then it's time you learned," I said calmly. "You're both adults, you're both capable. You don't need me as much as you think you do." "That's not true, Mom. You're important to us. You're part of our family." "Am I?" I asked quietly. "Or am I just useful to you?" The question hung in the air between us, unanswered and probably unanswerable. Because the truth was, Marcus genuinely loved me, but had also become accustomed to my constant availability. And Jessica was about to discover that useful people could become unavailable when they chose to be. My flight to Portland was booked for December 22nd. For the first time in years, I was going to spend Christmas somewhere I was genuinely wanted rather than merely needed. The dead weight was removing itself, exactly as requested. Portland in December was a revelation. Claire's house overlooked the Willamette River, and every morning I woke up to misty views and the sound of coffee brewing in a kitchen where I was genuinely welcome. My sister had planned a week of activities that had nothing to do with being useful to anyone else: art galleries, bookshops, long walks through neighborhoods I'd never seen. "You seem different," Claire observed on Christmas Eve as we prepared dinner together. "Lighter, somehow." I was arranging flowers she'd picked up from the farmer's market. Something I did because I enjoyed it, not because anyone expected it of me. "I feel different. I think I'm finally learning what it means to live for myself instead of through other people." "It suits you," she said, chopping vegetables with practiced ease. You're more present. Does that make sense? It did make sense. For the first time in years, I wasn't mentally calculating what someone else needed from me, wasn't anticipating problems to solve or feelings to manage. I was simply here, in this moment, creating something beautiful because it brought me joy. My phone had been largely quiet since I'd arrived in Portland. A few text messages from Marcus. "Merry Christmas Eve, Mom. Missing you," and radio silence from Jessica. I wondered how their first self-managed Christmas was going, but I felt no urge to check in or offer help. On Christmas morning, Claire and I opened gifts by the fireplace before her adult children arrived for dinner. She'd given me a beautiful journal bound in soft leather, its pages thick and cream-colored. "For your new chapter," she'd written in the card. I ran my fingers over the smooth cover, thinking about what I might write in those pages. For so many years, my story had been intertwined with other people's narratives. David's wife, Marcus's mother, Jessica's helper. Now I had blank pages to fill with whatever came next. Christmas dinner at Claire's was everything the holidays should be: warm, chaotic, filled with laughter and stories and genuine affection. Her daughter Emma, a nurse in her 30s, asked thoughtful questions about my life. Her son Jake, fresh out of college, shared funny stories about his job at a tech startup. Claire's ex-husband even stopped by with his new wife, and everyone was gracious and welcoming. No one needed me to orchestrate the meal or mediate conversations or clean up afterward. I was simply present, contributing when I felt moved to do so, enjoying the flow of family life without being responsible for managing it. "Your family is lovely," I told Claire as we sat by the fire that evening, the dishes done and everyone else gone home. "They're your family too," she said simply. "You know, Emma's been asking when you might move up here. There's a great senior community about 10 minutes from my house. Independent living, but with activities and support when you need it." The idea hadn't occurred to me, but something about it felt intriguing rather than threatening. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. My peaceful holiday was interrupted on December 27th by a series of increasingly frantic calls from Marcus. I let the first few go to voicemail, but when he called for the fourth time in 2 hours, I finally answered. "Mom, thank God. Where have you been? I've been trying to reach you all day." "I've been sightseeing with Claire," I said calmly. "What's wrong?" "Everything's wrong," he said, his voice tight with stress. Christmas was a disaster. Jess tried to cook dinner, but the turkey was dry, and the sides were either burnt or undercooked. Her parents came, and her dad made comments about the food all evening. Then yesterday, the furnace started making weird noises, and now it's not working at all. The house is freezing and we can't get a repair company until next week because of the holiday. I made sympathetic noises, but offered no solutions. "And," Marcus continued, "Jess has been weird all week, like really quiet and stressed. She keeps saying she doesn't understand why you're not here, that it doesn't feel like Christmas without you. I think she's finally realizing how much you do for us." "That's unfortunate about the furnace," I said. "Have you considered staying in a hotel until it's repaired?" "A hotel? For a week? Do you know how much that would cost?" "Less than pneumonia, I'd imagine," I replied. "Or maybe you could stay with friends." There was a pause. I kept thinking you'd know what to do. "You always know what to do. You'll figure it out," I said with confidence I genuinely felt. "You're both resourceful adults." After we hung up, I felt a small pang of sympathy for their situation, but it was overwhelmed by satisfaction. The competent young couple who didn't need oversight was discovering what self-reliance actually required. I extended my stay in Portland by 3 days, partly because Claire and I were having such a good time, and partly because I wasn't ready to return to the complicated dynamics waiting for me in Riverside. When I finally flew home on New Year's Day, I felt like a different person than the one who'd left 2 weeks earlier. My house felt smaller when I walked in, but also more intentionally mine. Without the constant pull of family obligations, I saw my space with fresh eyes. The guest room that had always been ready for Marcus and Jessica's visits, the kitchen perpetually stocked for spontaneous dinners, The schedule kept flexible for their needs. All of it suddenly seemed like preparation for people who no longer appreciated the effort. That evening, Jessica called. Her voice was carefully modulated, but I could hear strain underneath the politeness. "Margaret, welcome home. How was your trip?" "Wonderful," I said honestly. "Portland is beautiful this time of year." "I'm so glad. Listen, I was hoping we could get together soon. Maybe coffee this week? I feel like we haven't really talked in a while." The request was interesting. Jessica rarely initiated one-on-one time with me anymore, and when she did, it was usually because she needed something. But there was something different in her tone. Less confident, more tentative. "I could do Friday afternoon," I said. "How about that cafe on Main Street?" "Perfect. 2 o'clock? See you then." Friday afternoon. I arrived at the cafe 5 minutes early and secured a quiet table near the window. Jessica arrived exactly on time, looking polished but tired. She'd lost weight, I noticed, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. "You look wonderful," she said as she sat down, and for once the compliment seemed genuine rather than perfunctory. "Portland obviously agreed with you." "It did," I confirmed. "How are things with you?" "Marcus mentioned your father's doing better." "Much better. Thank you for asking. The doctors say he should make a full recovery with some lifestyle changes." She paused, fidgeting with her coffee cup. "Margaret, I wanted to talk to you about, well, about us, about our relationship." This was unexpected. I waited for her to continue. "I feel like something has changed between us over the past few months, and I'm not sure why. You seem more distant, less involved, and I know I haven't always been as appreciative as I should be of everything you do for our family." The admission was carefully crafted, but it was still an admission. I studied her face, looking for signs of genuine remorse versus strategic calculation. "What makes you think I'm less involved?" I asked. Jessica looked surprised by the question. "Well, you didn't help when my dad was sick. You went to Portland for Christmas instead of spending it with us. You don't call as often or drop by the house. It feels like you're pulling away from us." "I'm not pulling away," I said carefully. "I'm just being more selective about how I spend my time and energy." "But we're family," Jessica said, and there was a note of genuine confusion in her voice. "Isn't family supposed to be there for each other?" The irony was staggering. The woman who'd called me dead weight was now lecturing me about family obligations. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Family should be there for each other. It should be mutual support, mutual respect, mutual appreciation." Something flickered in Jessica's eyes, a moment of recognition that perhaps the conversation wasn't going where she'd expected. "I know I haven't always been as good at expressing gratitude as I should be," she said carefully. "But I do appreciate everything you've done for us. The down payment, all the help with the house, the dinners, everything. I hope you know that." "Do you?" I asked gently, because sometimes it feels like my contributions were seen as burdensome. Jessica's face went pale. "Burdensome? Margaret, why would you think that?" I could have confronted her directly about what I'd overheard. I could have repeated her words back to her, forcing her to acknowledge her true feelings. But something held me back. Perhaps the realization that her admission wouldn't change anything, or perhaps the understanding that her discomfort was punishment enough. "Just a feeling," I said, instead. "Sometimes when you love someone, you can sense when that love isn't entirely welcome." "That's not true," Jessica said quickly, but her voice lacked conviction. "We love having you in our lives. Marcus especially. He's been so worried about you pulling away." "Marcus is a wonderful son," I agreed. "He's also used to having his problems solved by other people. It might be good for him to develop more independence." "But you're his mother," Jessica protested. "It's natural for him to rely on you." "Is it?" I asked. "He's 32 years old, married, and established in his career. At what point does natural reliance become unhealthy dependence?" Jessica stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically see her recalibrating her approach. This wasn't the compliant, available Margaret she was used to managing. "I think," she said slowly, "that maybe we've taken your generosity for granted. And if that's the case, I want to apologize." It was a carefully worded quasi-apology that admitted no specific wrongdoing while appearing to take responsibility. I had to admire her political skills. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I want you to know that I'm not angry or hurt. I'm just reassessing my priorities." "What does that mean, exactly?" Jessica asked, and now there was a note of genuine worry in her voice. "It means I'm focusing more on relationships and activities that bring me joy rather than just fulfilling obligations," I explained. "I'm exploring new interests, spending time with people who seek out my company rather than just my help." "We seek out your company," Jessica protested. "Do you?" I asked gently. "When was the last time you called me just to talk? Not because you needed something. When was the last time you invited me somewhere because you wanted to spend time with me? Not because you needed help with hosting or cooking?" Jessica opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. "I see your point," she said finally. I think maybe I've been so focused on establishing our independence as a couple that I forgot that independence doesn't have to mean isolation." It was a more thoughtful response than I'd expected, and for a moment I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps we could find a new, healthier dynamic. "I'd like to work on that," Jessica continued, "building a better relationship with you, one that's more balanced." "I'd be open to that," I said carefully, "but it would have to be genuine, Jessica. Not because you need something from me, but because you actually value having me in your life." "I do value it," she said, and for the first time in months, she sounded like she might actually mean it. "I know I haven't shown that well, but I do." We finished our coffee with tentative plans to have lunch again in a few weeks. No agenda other than spending time together. As I drove home, I found myself cautiously optimistic. Perhaps Jessica's realization that she could lose me had sparked some genuine self-reflection. But I'd learned to be careful about mistaking strategic behavior for authentic change. The real test would be whether Jessica's new appreciation survived once she realized I wasn't planning to resume my old role in their lives. Because regardless of how our relationship evolved going forward, I was never again going to be someone's convenient solution to every problem. I was never again going to be taken for granted or dismissed as dead weight. I had discovered something powerful in Portland, the peace that comes from being wanted rather than needed. And now that I'd tasted that freedom, I wasn't giving it up for anyone. February brought news that would test every boundary I'd carefully constructed. Marcus called on a Tuesday evening, his voice carrying an excitement I hadn't heard in months. "Mom, we have amazing news. Jess is pregnant." My first reaction was pure, uncomplicated joy. A grandchild. The continuation of our family line, a new person to love and guide and spoil. For a moment, all the complicated dynamics of the past year faded in the face of this fundamental happiness. "Marcus, that's wonderful," I said, and meant it completely. "How is Jessica feeling? When is she due?" "She's doing great, just a little morning sickness. The due date is September 15th. "We're over the moon, Mom. We've been trying for almost a year." "I'm so happy for you both," I said, though I couldn't help noting that this was the first I'd heard about their attempts to conceive. Another milestone I'd been excluded from. Another piece of their lives they'd decided I didn't need to know about. "We want to tell you in person," Marcus continued. "Can you come for dinner Sunday? Jess is making that pasta dish you taught her." The invitation felt significant. An olive branch extended through exciting news. "I'd love to," I said. Sunday dinner was the most pleasant evening I'd spent at their house in months. Jessica glowed with early pregnancy radiance, and both of them seemed genuinely happy to share their news with me. Jessica had prepared the meal carefully, and for once our conversation flowed naturally without the undercurrent of tension that had become our norm. "We haven't told many people yet," Jessica said as we lingered over dessert. "Just our parents and Marcus's cousin Tony. We wanted you to be among the first to know." It was a gesture of inclusion that felt meaningful, and I found myself softening toward her in a way I hadn't in months. Have you thought about names? I asked, settling into the familiar joy of discussing future grandparent plans. We're considering family names, Marcus said. Maybe David for a boy, after Dad. And for a girl, we thought about Margaret. The suggestion caught me off guard. After months of feeling pushed to the margins, the idea that they might name their daughter after me was deeply moving. That's very generous, I managed. You've been such an important part of our lives, Jessica said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. We want our children to carry that connection forward. For the first time, since overhearing her deadweight comment, I felt genuinely hopeful about our relationship. Perhaps impending parenthood had given Jessica a new perspective on the value of family connections. Perhaps she was finally understanding what she'd been pushing away. Over the following weeks, Jessica's outreach increased noticeably. She called more frequently, sharing pregnancy symptoms and doctor's appointment updates. She asked for advice about baby gear and nursery planning. When she texted photos of potential cribs and car seats, asking for my opinion, I felt useful in a way that seemed welcome rather than obligatory. I keep thinking about how much help we're going to need, she said during one of our phone calls. Especially in those first few months. New parents are so overwhelmed, aren't they? They can be, I agreed carefully. But there are lots of resources available now, support groups, classes, professional help if you need it. Well, we're hoping family will be our main support system, Jessica said. My mom wants to help, but she lives so far away, and she's not really the hands-on type anyway. The implication was clear. She was expecting me to fill the role of primary grandmother support. The old Margaret would have immediately volunteered, offered to move in for the first month, promised to handle night feedings and diaper changes, and whatever else they needed. The new Margaret chose her words more carefully. I'm sure you'll figure out what works best for your family, I said. There are so many different approaches to newborn care these days. I could hear the slight pause that indicated this wasn't quite the response Jessica had been fishing for. Of course, she said. I just meant, I hope you'll want to be really involved. As a grandmother, I absolutely want to be involved, I assured her. I'm just learning not to assume what that involvement should look like. It was a subtle distinction, but an important one. I would love this grandchild fiercely, but I wouldn't automatically sacrifice my own life to become their unpaid childcare provider. March brought Jessica's 12-week appointment and the official announcement to extended family and friends. I watched her post ultrasound photos on social media, the platforms I didn't use but Marcus had started showing me occasionally, and felt the bittersweet pleasure of seeing our family's joy shared with the world. The social media posts also revealed something interesting. Jessica was already crafting the narrative of their pregnancy journey, emphasizing their excitement and preparation, while making no mention of the family support they were counting on. Even in her moment of celebration, she was maintaining the image of self-sufficient success. The response has been incredible, she told me when I called to congratulate her on going public with the news. So many people are offering help and advice. Marcus's coworkers have already started passing down baby gear. That's wonderful, I said. It really does take a village. Exactly. Though of course, nothing replaces having family nearby who really know you and can provide consistent support. Again, the hint. Again, the expectation wrapped in gratitude. You're fortunate to have a family who cares about you, I agreed, without making specific commitments. By April, Jessica's pregnancy was showing, and she'd settled into the second trimester glow that made her seem more relaxed and confident. She'd also become more direct about her expectations for my involvement. I've been thinking about the nursery, she said during one of our coffee dates, a tradition we'd resumed with cautious regularity. I know you probably have opinions about where it should be and how to set it up. I'm sure whatever you decide will be perfect, I said. Have you thought about which room you want to use? Well, there's the obvious choice, Jessica said, giving me a meaningful look. The guest room has the best light and it's closest to our bedroom. The guest room. The space that had been redecorated specifically to discourage my overnight visits, now housed a firm daybed instead of a comfortable queen bed. That makes sense, I said neutrally. Of course, that means we wouldn't really have a proper guest room anymore, Jessica continued. But I figure with the baby coming, we probably won't be hosting overnight visitors much anyway. The message was unmistakable. My overnight stays were being permanently eliminated, justified by the baby's needs rather than acknowledged as Jessica's preference. Probably wise to simplify your living situation, I agreed. What Jessica didn't know was that I'd already begun making my own plans for this transition. During my visit to Portland, Claire and I had seriously discussed the possibility of relocating there. The senior community she'd mentioned had a 6-month waiting list, but the lifestyle looked appealing. Independent living with optional social activities and support services. More importantly, Claire genuinely wanted me nearby, not for what I could do for her, but for the pleasure of my company. I'd submitted an application and put down a deposit, with a tentative move-in date of August. Conveniently before Jessica's due date, but after I'd had time to enjoy a summer of freedom in Riverside. I hadn't mentioned this possibility to Marcus or Jessica yet. I wanted to see how the pregnancy months unfolded, how they treated me once they needed me again, before I made any final decisions about my future. May brought Mother's Day, and for the first time in years, I didn't organize the celebration myself. Instead, Marcus and Jessica invited me to brunch at a restaurant downtown, a pleasant, public setting that required no preparation on anyone's part. To the best mom and future grandmother, Marcus toasted, raising his orange juice glass. And to Margaret, who's taught me so much about being strong and independent, Jessica added, her own glass raised in apparent sincerity. The irony of the second toast wasn't lost on me. Coming from someone who'd spent months trying to reduce my independence and increase my availability, but I smiled and accepted the tribute graciously. Thank you both, I said. This is lovely. The brunch was pleasant enough, but it felt carefully orchestrated rather than spontaneous. Jessica's social media posts later that day confirmed my suspicion. Multiple photos of our table, her pregnancy bump prominently featured, captions about celebrating the amazing women in our lives, and grateful for family. I was being used as a prop in her narrative again, the devoted mother-in-law who provided authenticity to her image of family happiness. Later that week, Jessica called with a request that revealed just how much she was counting on my support. Margaret, I know this is early to be thinking about, but my company is offering a really amazing project opportunity that would start when I'm ready to go back to work after maternity leave. It's a 6-month consulting contract with a tech startup, really good money, and great for my portfolio. That sounds exciting, I said. The thing is, it would require some travel and longer hours than my usual schedule, so I'd need really reliable childcare. The kind you can only get from family, you know? And there it was. The real reason for the renewed warmth, the inclusion in pregnancy milestones, the Mother's Day celebration. Jessica needed a grandmother who would provide free, flexible, unlimited babysitting so she could pursue her career goals. Have you looked into professional childcare options? I asked. Well, yes, but they're so expensive. And you never know if you can really trust them with your baby. Family is different. Family has the same investment in the child's well-being. That's true, I agreed. Family does have a different kind of investment. So I was hoping, I know you're retired and you have more flexibility in your schedule. Would you be open to being our primary childcare when I go back to work? The request was wrapped in assumptions that I had nothing better to do with my retirement, that my schedule was automatically available for their needs, that I would want to spend my days providing free childcare while Jessica built her career. That's quite a commitment, I said carefully. When would this start? Probably around March or April next year, when the baby's about 6 months old. I know it's a lot to ask, but it would mean everything to us. And I think you'd love spending that much time with your grandchild. She was right that I would love spending time with my grandchild. But the assumption that I should restructure my entire life around their career needs, without any discussion of what I might want or need in return, was exactly the kind of taking for granted that had led to our problems in the first place. I appreciate you thinking of me, I said, but I'll need to consider all my options before making that kind of commitment. Options? Jessica's voice carried a note of surprise. What other options? Well, I might not be available, I said simply. Not available how? I'm exploring some possibilities for my own life that might involve changes to my situation here. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if she'd hung up. What kind of changes? Jessica finally asked, her voice carefully controlled. Nothing definite yet, I said, truthfully. But I'm learning not to make assumptions about what my future will look like. After we hung up, I felt a familiar satisfaction at having avoided commitment while being completely honest. Jessica was learning what it felt like to have her expectations questioned, rather than automatically fulfilled. That evening, Marcus called. Mom, Jess mentioned you might not be available to help with the baby. She seemed really upset about it. I told her I'd consider all my options. I said, that seems reasonable for such a big decision. But Mom, it's your grandchild. Don't you want to be involved? Of course I want to be involved. But being involved doesn't necessarily mean providing full-time childcare while your wife travels for work. It's just, we were really counting on you. And we can't afford professional childcare for the kind of hours Jess would need. There it was again, the assumption that their financial limitations automatically became my responsibility to solve. Then perhaps Jessica should consider whether this opportunity is realistic, given your family situation, I suggested gently. You're really not going to help us? Marcus asked, and I could hear the disappointment and confusion in his voice. I didn't say that, I replied. I said I need to consider my options. There's a difference. But even as I spoke, I was thinking about the application sitting on my kitchen counter, the senior community in Portland where I could build a life focused on my own interests and relationships, where I could be a grandmother who was valued rather than expected, visited rather than relied upon. Jessica was about to learn that dead weight could relocate itself entirely. The call came on a sweltering July afternoon. I was in my garden, deadheading the roses and enjoying the peaceful rhythm of late summer maintenance, when my phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, but it was Jessica's voice that greeted me, tight with panic. Margaret, thank God you answered. I need you to come to the hospital right away. I'm having contractions and they think the baby might be coming early. All my carefully constructed boundaries dissolved in the face of genuine crisis. Whatever complicated feelings existed between Jessica and me, this was my grandchild potentially arriving 6 weeks ahead of schedule. I'm on my way, I said, already heading for my car keys. Which hospital? Riverside Medical. Margaret, I'm scared. It's too early. You're going to be fine, I said with more confidence than I felt. Babies born at 34 weeks do very well these days. Just focus on staying calm. The drive to the hospital gave me 20 minutes to prepare mentally for whatever I might find. I'd attended births before. Friends' children, my volunteer work had occasionally involved supporting young mothers, but this was my family, my grandchild. When I arrived at the maternity ward, I found Marcus pacing the waiting room, his hair disheveled and his shirt wrinkled from what looked like a hasty departure from work. Mom, thank you for coming, he said, pulling me into a hug that felt more desperate than grateful. They've got her on medication to try to stop the contractions, but if they can't, then we'll deal with whatever comes, I said firmly. Have you called her parents? They're flying in from Phoenix, but they won't be here until tonight. You're the only family we have right now. The only family. Despite everything that had passed between us, when the crisis struck, I was still the person they called. A nurse emerged from Jessica's room and approached us. Are you the grandmother? She asked me. Yes, she's asking for you. I followed the nurse down the hallway, my heart racing with anticipation and worry. Jessica lay in the hospital bed, monitors beeping around her, her face pale but determined. Margaret, she said when she saw me, her voice breaking slightly. I'm so glad you're here. I moved to her bedside without hesitation, taking her hand in mine. How are you feeling? Scared, she admitted. But better now that you're here. You always know what to do. For the next 6 hours, I stayed by Jessica's side while Marcus handled logistics, calling their employers, coordinating with her parents, managing the steady stream of medical updates. The contractions eventually subsided, and the doctors confirmed that the baby would stay put for a few more weeks with bed rest and careful monitoring. "You can go home tomorrow," Dr. Martinez told Jessica as evening approached. "But strict bed rest until at least 37 weeks. No work, no driving, minimal activity." After the doctor left, Jessica turned to me with tears in her eyes. "Margaret, I don't know how to ask this, but would you be willing to help me through the bed rest? Marcus can't take that much time off work, and my mom," she trailed off, but we both knew her mother wasn't the hands-on caregiving type. I looked at this young woman who'd called me dead weight, who'd systematically pushed me to the margins of their lives, who was now asking me to care for her in her most vulnerable state. The old Margaret would have said yes immediately, would have rearranged her entire life to provide whatever support was needed. The new Margaret chose her words carefully. "I can help," I said, "but we need to be clear about what that means and what it doesn't mean." Jessica nodded eagerly. "Anything. I just need someone I can count on. I can come by daily to check on you, help with meals and light housework, drive you to appointments." I continued, "But this isn't a return to the old dynamic where I'm constantly available for whatever you need. I have my own life and commitments." "Of course," Jessica said quickly. "I just need basic support. I don't want to impose." The conversation felt surreal. Jessica speaking about not wanting to impose after months of treating my availability as a given. "There's something else we need to discuss," I said gently. "My plans for the fall." Marcus looked up from his phone, where he'd been texting updates to relatives. "What plans?" "I've decided to move to Portland," I said simply. "I'll be relocating in late August, before the baby is born." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at me with wide eyes, while Marcus looked like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "Move to Portland?" Marcus finally managed. "But Mom, the baby's coming. We need you here." "You need support," I corrected. "That doesn't have to come from me." "But you're the grandmother," Jessica said, her voice rising with distress. "Grandmothers don't move away when grandchildren are being born." "Some grandmothers do," I replied calmly, "especially when they've been made to feel their presence is more of a burden than a blessing." Jessica's face went white. I don't know what." "Yes, you do," I said gently but firmly. "We don't need to rehash everything that's happened, but we also don't need to pretend it didn't happen." Marcus looked between us, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't understand. "What are you talking about? What happened?" I could have explained then. I could have told Marcus about the phone conversation I'd overheard, about the months of subtle dismissals and strategic exclusions. But what would be the point? Jessica knew what she'd done, and forcing Marcus to choose sides would only create more pain. "Your wife and I have had some differences of opinion about my role in your family," I said diplomatically. "I've decided it's better for everyone if I step back and let you build your own family traditions." "But Portland is so far away," Marcus protested. "We'll hardly ever see you." "You'll see me when you visit," I said. "Claire's house has plenty of space for guests, and Portland is a wonderful city to explore with children." "This is because of the childcare thing, isn't it?" Jessica said suddenly. "Because I asked you to help when I go back to work. It's because of everything," I said simply. "I've realized I want to spend my remaining years living for myself rather than being useful to others." "But we love you," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're not just useful to us. You're family." "I know you love me," I assured him. "And I love you both, and I'll love this baby more than life itself. But love doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my own happiness to meet your expectations." Jessica was crying now, quiet tears sliding down her cheeks. "I messed this up, didn't I? I pushed you away, and now you're leaving." It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in months. "You didn't push me away," I said gently. "You helped me realize I needed to create a life that was fulfilling for me, not just useful for others." Over the following days, as Jessica recovered at home and settled into bed rest, I provided the support I'd promised. I brought meals, ran errands, drove her to doctor appointments. But I also maintained the boundaries I'd established, leaving each evening to return to my own life rather than moving in to manage theirs. The conversations during those weeks were different than any we'd had before. Jessica, perhaps humbled by her vulnerable position, seemed more genuine in her interactions with me. She asked about my pottery classes, my hiking group, and my plans for Portland. For the first time, she seemed interested in me as a person, rather than just as a resource. "I think I understand now," she said one afternoon as I was preparing to leave after bringing her lunch. "Why are you moving? I mean, I've been lying in this bed for 2 weeks, and it's the first time in years I've had to really think about what I want versus what everyone expects from me." "And what have you concluded?" I asked. "That I've been so focused on proving I could handle everything on my own that I forgot to appreciate the people who were actually helping me handle it." She said quietly, "I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry I took you for granted. I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome in your own family." It was the apology I'd needed to hear, but by then it was too late to change my plans. The wheels were already in motion for my move to Portland, and more importantly, I'd discovered I genuinely wanted the life I was building there. "I accept your apology," I said, "and I hope you understand that accepting it doesn't mean I'm staying." "I understand," Jessica said. "I just wish I'd figured it out sooner." My granddaughter was born on August 28th, 2 days before my scheduled move to Portland. Emma Rose Chen. They'd kept the promise to use family names, though Jessica had chosen my middle name rather than my first, a small but meaningful distinction. She was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of pink perfection with Marcus's dark hair and what the nurses claimed were my eyes. I held her in the hospital room, surrounded by flowers and balloons and the chaos of new parenthood, and felt my heart expand in ways I'd forgotten were possible. "She's beautiful," I whispered, studying her tiny features. "She's going to miss having her grandmother nearby," Jessica said softly. "She's going to have adventures visiting her grandmother in Portland," I corrected. "And she's going to grow up knowing that women can be strong and independent, and still loving and generous." 3 days later, Marcus and Jessica drove me to the airport. Emma was home with Jessica's mother, who'd extended her visit to help with the transition. We stood in the departure area, surrounded by my luggage and the weight of everything we weren't saying. "I still can't believe you're really leaving," Marcus said, hugging me tightly. "I'm not leaving you," I assured him. "I'm just choosing where I want to live my life." Jessica stepped forward, her own hug surprising me with its genuine warmth. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for the down payment, for the help, for staying with me when Emma almost came early, and for showing me what it looks like to choose yourself." "Take care of each other," I said, "and bring Emma to visit soon." "We will," Marcus promised. As my plane lifted off from Ontario International Airport, I looked down at the sprawling landscape of Southern California and felt nothing but peace. Below me was the life I'd built around other people's needs and expectations. Ahead of me was the life I was choosing for myself. 6 months later, I received a video call from Marcus and Jessica, Emma propped between them in her high chair, chewing on a teething ring, and babbling happily at the camera. "Say hi to Grandma Margaret," Jessica cooed, and Emma waved a chubby hand at the screen. "She's gotten so big," I exclaimed, delighted by every change I could see in my granddaughter's face. "We're planning to visit for Easter," Marcus said. "If that works for you, it works perfectly," I assured them. "Claire is already planning all the places she wants to take Emma." After we hung up, I sat in my bright apartment, overlooking the Willamette River, and reflected on the journey that had brought me here. In trying to make me feel like dead weight, Jessica had actually given me a gift, the motivation to discover my own worth outside of my usefulness to others. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was simply free to love my family without sacrificing myself for them, free to be a grandmother on my own terms, free to live a life that brought me joy rather than just obligation. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't fight back against someone who diminishes you. Sometimes It's simply removing yourself from their ability to diminish you and building something beautiful in the space you create. I'd been called deadweight, but what I'd actually been was the foundation, supporting everyone else while neglecting my own needs. Now I was building something new, something that was entirely mine. And from this foundation I could love them all more freely than I ever had before. The first year in Portland exceeded every expectation I'd harbored about starting over in my 70s. Claire had been right about the senior community. Sunset Ridge wasn't just housing. It was a vibrant ecosystem of people who'd chosen to embrace this stage of life rather than merely endure it. My apartment faced west toward the mountains, and every evening I watched the sun set behind snow-capped peaks while sipping tea on my small balcony. My neighbors were fascinating. Dr. Patricia Yamamoto, a retired pediatrician who'd volunteered in refugee camps around the world, lived next door and became my walking partner. Across the hall, Robert and Jean Martinez, former high school sweethearts who'd reunited after both losing their first spouses, reminded me daily that love could bloom at any age. The community garden where I grew heirloom tomatoes was tended by a retired NASA engineer, a former Broadway costume designer, and a woman who'd spent 40 years as a wilderness guide. These weren't people marking time until death. They were people living intentionally, and their energy was contagious. I joined the community choir, something I hadn't done since college. Every Tuesday evening, 30 voices gathered in the common room to work through everything from classical pieces to contemporary folk songs. Our director, a spry 80-year-old named Francis who'd taught music in the Portland public schools for decades, pushed us to attempt harmonies that seemed beyond our abilities. "Age gives you permission to be terrible at something new," he'd say with a grin. "Embrace the beginner's mind." Thursday mornings, I volunteered at the nearby elementary school, helping second graders with reading comprehension. The children were endlessly curious about my accent. Apparently my California pronunciation sounded exotic to Oregon natives, and they peppered me with questions about what life was like in the old days. "Did you really not have computers when you were little?" 7-year-old Sophia asked during one session. "Not only did we not have computers," I told her, "we didn't have calculators. We had to do math in our heads or on paper." Her expression of pure horror made me laugh until my sides ached. Weekends often found me exploring Portland's neighborhoods with Claire or my new friends from Sunset Ridge. The city revealed itself slowly. The food truck pods scattered throughout different districts, the endless variety of coffee shops, the bookstores where you could lose entire afternoons browsing. Powell's Books became my regular Saturday destination, its maze of rooms and levels offering treasures I never would have discovered online. But perhaps the most transformative aspect of my new life was the pottery studio I'd joined downtown. The instructor, a patient woman named Keiko, who'd studied ceramics in Japan, taught us that working with clay required surrendering control while maintaining intention. A philosophy that seemed to apply to more than just pottery. "The clay will tell you what it wants to become," she explained during my first lesson. "Your job is to listen and guide, not to force." I thought of Jessica as I worked the clay, remembering all the times I'd tried to force relationships into shapes they weren't meant to hold. My hands learned to feel for the clay's natural tendencies, to work with its properties rather than against them. The metaphor wasn't lost on me. By November, I'd created my first successful bowl, imperfect but functional, with a deep blue glaze that reminded me of the Pacific Ocean on clear mornings. I photographed it and sent the image to Marcus, who immediately called to congratulate me. "Mom, that's incredible. When did you become an artist?" "I've always been creative," I said, realizing as I spoke that it was true. I just never had time to explore it before. "Well, Emma's going to need a special bowl from Grandma Margaret when she starts eating solid food." The mention of Emma filled me with familiar warmth. Through weekly video calls, I'd watched my granddaughter grow from a tiny newborn into an alert 4-month-old who'd recently discovered her hands. Jessica had started holding the phone closer to Emma during our calls, and I swore the baby was beginning to recognize my voice. "How are you doing with the night feedings?" I asked. Jessica had returned to work part-time, and I knew they were navigating the complex logistics of dual careers and parenthood. "Better than I expected," Marcus said. Jess hired a nanny for the days she's in the office, and my mom has been helping on weekends. I felt a small twinge, not jealousy exactly, but awareness that my former role was being filled by others. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by genuine gladness that they were managing well. "I'm proud of how you're handling everything," I told him, and meant it completely. Christmas in Portland was everything I'd hoped it would be. Claire's family embraced me as fully as if I'd been living there for decades, and I contributed homemade gifts from my pottery class, small bowls and cups that each family member would use daily. The children were delighted by the idea that Aunt Margaret had made their presents with her own hands. "This is the coolest gift ever," Emma's teenage daughter announced, examining the glazed mug I'd made in deep green with gold accents. "I'm going to drink my coffee from this every morning before school." On New Year's Eve, I stood on my balcony watching fireworks bloom over the Portland skyline and felt grateful in a way that had nothing to do with obligation or duty. This gratitude was clean, simple, appreciation for a life that was wholly my own. The call about the will came in February. Thomas Bradley, my lawyer back in Riverside, phoned to inform me that Jessica had contacted his office, asking questions about my estate planning. "She seemed surprised to learn she wasn't included in your current will," he said carefully. "I told her I couldn't discuss details, but that she was welcome to speak with you directly if she had concerns." I wasn't surprised. Jessica's pregnancy and new motherhood had probably prompted thoughts about financial security for Emma's future. The old version of my will would have provided that security through Jessica's inheritance rights as Marcus's wife. The new version left everything to Marcus personally, with specific provisions that Jessica couldn't access the funds. "Did she say what prompted her inquiry?" I asked. "Something about life insurance policies and wanting to understand what provisions existed for Emma's education," Thomas replied. "She mentioned they're considering starting a college fund and wanted to know if that was already addressed in your planning." It was a reasonable concern for new parents to have, but the timing suggested Jessica was realizing that her relationship with me had financial implications she hadn't previously considered. I didn't call Jessica about the will conversation. If she wanted to discuss my estate planning, she could reach out to me directly. I wasn't going to anticipate or manage her concerns anymore. Instead, I focused on planning my spring garden. The community garden at Sunset Ridge was expanding, and I'd requested a larger plot for the coming season. I wanted to try growing herbs I'd never attempted before: lemon verbena, chocolate mint, 3 varieties of basil. Patricia Yamamoto had offered to teach me her method for growing Japanese eggplant, and I was eager to learn. "You seem more adventurous this year," Claire observed as we walked through the gardening center, my cart filled with seed packets and small plants. "I'm finally old enough not to care if I fail at something," I replied, selecting a packet of purple carrots I'd never heard of before Portland. "Is that what wisdom is?" Claire asked with a smile. "Permission to fail?" "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it's permission to try things just because they interest you, not because anyone needs you to succeed at them." March brought news that Marcus and Jessica were planning to visit for Easter weekend. As promised, they'd booked a hotel downtown and would stay for 4 days, giving us plenty of time to enjoy Emma's company without the pressure of houseguests. "I can't wait for you to meet Emma in person," Jessica said during our weekly video call. "She's rolling over now and she makes this adorable giggling sound when you tickle her feet." "I can't wait either," I said honestly. "And I'm excited to show you Portland. Claire has planned a whole itinerary of things to do with the baby." "Actually," Jessica said, her tone shifting slightly, "I was wondering if we could talk privately while we're there. There are some things I'd like to discuss. Well, about family planning and the future." I agreed, though I suspected I knew what topics Jessica wanted to address. The will inquiry had probably raised questions about financial security that she wanted to discuss face-to-face. 2 weeks before their visit, I received an unexpected call from Marcus on a Tuesday evening. His voice carried a tension I hadn't heard since the early days of Emma's pregnancy scare. "Mom, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." "Of course," I said, settling into my reading chair with a cup of chamomile tea. Did something happen between you and Jessica that I don't know about? Something that made you change your will? So Jessica had told him about her conversation with Thomas Bradley. I wasn't surprised, but I was curious about how she'd framed the discovery. Why do you ask? I said. Because she's been really upset since she talked to your lawyer. She says she found out she's not in your will anymore, and she's worried it means you don't consider Emma part of the family. Emma is absolutely part of the family, I said firmly. She's your daughter, which makes her my granddaughter. The will reflects that relationship. But Jessica's Emma's mother, Marcus protested. If something happened to me, she'd need support to raise Emma alone. If something happened to you, Jessica would receive substantial life insurance benefits, I pointed out. And Emma would inherit through your share of my estate when she comes of age. That's not the same thing, though, is it? Jessica would be left out entirely. I took a slow sip of my tea, considering my words carefully. Marcus, do you think Jessica deserves to inherit from me? She's family, he said, but I could hear uncertainty in his voice. That's not what I asked. I asked if you think she deserves to inherit from me, based on how she's treated me and valued my presence in your lives. There was a long pause. I don't understand what you mean. Then maybe you should ask Jessica to explain why she thinks I might have changed my estate planning, I suggested gently. Ask her to be honest about our relationship over the past few years. Mom, you're scaring me. What happened between you two? Nothing that can't be worked out, I said. But some conversations need to happen between all of us, not just between you and me. After we hung up, I sat in my living room looking out at the lights of Portland and feeling oddly peaceful about the coming confrontation. I'd been living my new life for 8 months, and I was strong enough now to have difficult conversations without losing myself in them. Jessica wanted to talk about the future. I was ready for that conversation, but it would happen on my terms, with complete honesty about the past. The dead weight had learned to anchor itself, and no one would be moving it again without permission. Easter weekend arrived with Portland's characteristic spring drizzle, but the city felt vibrant despite the gray skies. Cherry blossoms lined the streets in my neighborhood, their pink petals scattered on wet sidewalks like confetti. I'd spent the morning arranging fresh flowers from the Pike Place market. Claire and I had driven up to Seattle the day before for a mini-adventure, and the apartment smelled like Easter lilies and fresh bread from the loaf I'd baked that morning. Marcus called from their hotel at noon, Emma's happy babbling audible in the background. We're here. Emma slept most of the flight, and she's been charming every stranger in the hotel lobby. When can we see you? Come over whenever you're ready, I said. I have lunch prepared, and Claire will be here around 2 with her grandchildren. Emma's going to have built-in playmates. Perfect. We'll grab the car seat and be there in 20 minutes. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. One last time. The woman looking back at me bore little resemblance to the anxious, diminished person who'd overheard that devastating phone conversation 18 months ago. This woman had silver hair. She wore short and stylish clothes that reflected her own taste rather than practicality for others' needs, and eyes that held steady confidence instead of uncertain hope. When the knock came, I opened the door to find Marcus holding a pink-cheeked baby who was even more beautiful in person than she'd appeared on video calls. Emma had grown into her features, Marcus's dark eyes, Jessica's delicate nose, and what everyone claimed was my determined chin. There's my granddaughter, I said softly, and Emma turned toward my voice with obvious recognition. When I held out my arms, she leaned toward me without hesitation. She knows you, Jessica said, her voice carrying wonder and something that might have been relief. Look how comfortable she is. Emma settled against my shoulder as if she'd been doing it all her life, one tiny hand tangling in my necklace while she studied my face with serious concentration. The love I felt was immediate and overwhelming. Not the obligatory affection I'd worried about developing from a distance, but the fierce, protective tenderness that grandmothers are famous for. Hello, beautiful girl, I whispered, breathing in her sweet baby scent. I'm so happy to finally hold you. The first few hours of their visit felt almost normal. Marcus was genuinely interested in my apartment, asking questions about the community and expressing surprise at how full my social calendar had become. Jessica seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in years, laughing as Emma discovered the light-up musical toy that Claire's youngest granddaughter had outgrown. "This place is amazing, Mom," Marcus said, standing on my balcony and looking out toward the river. "I had no idea Portland was so beautiful. Every day I wake up grateful to be here," I replied, and meant it completely. Claire arrived with her 7-year-old twin grandsons, Jake and Tyler, who immediately appointed themselves Emma's entertainment committee. Watching them make funny faces to earn her giggles, I felt the rightness of this life I'd built, surrounded by people who chose to be here, creating joy without agenda or obligation. During dinner, Jessica seemed quieter than usual, occasionally glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. When the boys were busy showing Emma how to stack blocks, Jessica finally spoke up. "Margaret, would it be possible for us to talk privately after dinner? There are some things I've been wanting to discuss." "Of course," I said. "Claire, would you mind entertaining Marcus and Emma for a while?" "Are you kidding? I've been waiting months to get uninterrupted baby time," Claire replied, already reaching for Emma. "Take as long as you need." Jessica and I settled in my small study, a cozy room lined with bookshelves and dominated by a comfortable reading chair I'd purchased during my first month in Portland. Through the window, we could see the river reflecting the early evening light. "Your apartment is lovely," Jessica said, but her tone suggested she was working up to something more substantial. "You seem really happy here." "I am," I confirmed. "Happier than I've been in years." "That's wonderful, and I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you did to help us when Emma was born. Staying with me during the bed rest, being there for the early labor scare. I don't know what we would have done without you." "You would have figured it out," I said gently. "You're both more capable than you realize." Jessica fidgeted with her wedding ring, turning it around her finger in a gesture I recognized as nervousness. "Margaret, I need to ask you about something, and I hope you'll be honest with me." "I'll do my best." "Marcus told me he spoke with you about the will situation, about me not being included anymore." She paused, gathering courage. "I need to understand why you made that decision." Here it was, the conversation I'd been anticipating since February. I studied Jessica's face, looking for signs of manipulation or strategic positioning. But what I saw instead was genuine uncertainty and what might have been fear. "What did Marcus tell you about our conversation?" I asked. "That you said I should explain why you might have changed your estate planning. That there were things about our relationship I should be honest about." She took a shaky breath. "Margaret, I've been thinking about that for weeks, and I'm terrified that I know exactly what you mean." "What do you think I mean?" "I think you overheard something you weren't supposed to hear. Something I said about you that was terrible and unfair." Her eyes filled with tears. "I think you heard me call you dead weight." The admission hung in the air between us. I felt a strange sense of relief that we were finally addressing the elephant that had been sitting in every room for over a year. "When did you figure that out?" I asked. "Not until after Emma was born, and you were leaving for Portland. I kept thinking about why you'd suddenly become so distant, why you'd stopped offering help, why you seemed different. And then I remembered that day when we came back from San Diego early, and you were watering the plants. You seemed off when we saw you, but I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized what I'd been doing outside on the phone right before you left. I'd been complaining to my mother about you." She was crying openly now. "Margaret, I am so sorry. What I said was cruel and ungrateful and completely wrong." "Why did you say that?" I asked, not unkindly but with genuine curiosity. Jessica wiped her eyes with the tissue I handed her, taking time to collect her thoughts. "I think I was feeling overwhelmed by how much you did for us, and instead of being grateful, I felt diminished by it. Like I couldn't measure up to this standard of helpfulness and competence you'd set. So instead of dealing with my own insecurities, I made you the problem." It was a more insightful answer than I'd expected, and more honest than I dared hope for. I also think, she continued, that I was afraid you'd never see me as capable of being the center of my own family. Like I'd always be the daughter-in-law trying to live up to the real woman of the house. Is that how you saw our relationship? As competition? Sometimes. Yes. And that was my failing, not yours. You never tried to compete with me or undermine me. You just existed so confidently that I felt threatened by it. I sat back in my chair, processing this explanation. It didn't excuse what she'd said or how she'd treated me, but it helped me understand the psychology behind it. Jessica, I need you to understand something, I said finally. What you said hurt me deeply, but it also gave me a gift. She looked confused. A gift? It made me realize I'd been living my life as an extension of other people instead of as a person in my own right. I was so focused on being useful that I'd forgotten how to be fulfilled. But you were happy helping us, weren't you? I mean, before I ruined everything. I thought I was. But there's a difference between happiness and contentment, and there's a difference between feeling needed and feeling valued. I was needed, but I wasn't valued. Not really. I was taken for granted. Jessica nodded slowly. You're right, I did take you for granted. We both did. The question now, I continued, is whether you understand why that pattern can't continue. What do you mean? I mean that I'm not returning to Riverside to resume my old role in your lives. I'm not going to be the grandmother who provides unlimited free childcare so you can pursue your career goals. I'm not going to be the solution to every problem or the answer to every need. Jessica's face fell. So you're punishing us? I'm protecting myself, I corrected. There's a difference. But what about Emma? She needs her grandmother. Emma will have her grandmother. She'll have a grandmother who visits and sends gifts and video calls every week. She'll have a grandmother who loves her fiercely, but who also models what it looks like for women to live independent, fulfilling lives. That's not the same as having you nearby. No, it's not. But it's what I'm offering. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the weight of this conversation. Finally, Jessica spoke again. What about the will? Is there any way? I mean, I understand why you changed it. But Emma's future? Emma's future is secure through Marcus's inheritance, I said firmly. And Marcus's inheritance is structured to ensure that Emma benefits from it whether or not you and Marcus stay married. Jessica's eyes widened. You think we might get divorced? I don't think anything specific about your marriage, but I've learned that life is unpredictable, and I want to make sure my granddaughter is provided for regardless of what happens between you and Marcus. So there's no chance of you including me again. I studied her face, seeing genuine distress, but also something else. A calculating quality that suggested she was still thinking about this primarily in terms of what she might gain or lose. Jessica, do you want to be in my will because you care about our relationship, or because you want financial security? Both, she admitted after a moment. Is that terrible? It's honest, I said, and honesty is more than I got from you for most of our relationship. So what would it take for you to trust me again? I mean, the question surprised me with its directness. I don't know, I said. Truthfully, trust isn't rebuilt with grand gestures or apologies. It's rebuilt with consistent, authentic behavior over time. How much time? I don't know that either. Maybe years, maybe never. I'm not sure it matters anymore. It matters to me, Jessica said quietly. I know I have no right to ask for another chance, but I'm asking anyway. Not for the money. Well, not only for the money, but because I want Emma to grow up knowing that her mother and grandmother have a good relationship. Then you'll need to show me what that good relationship looks like, I said. Not through words, but through actions. Consistent actions that demonstrate you value me as a person, not just as a resource. How do I do that from so far away? You figure it out, I said simply. If it's important to you, you'll find a way. When we rejoined the others in the living room, Marcus immediately looked between our faces, clearly trying to read the results of our conversation. Emma was asleep in Claire's arms, exhausted from her day of new experiences and stimulation. Everything okay? Marcus asked. We had a good talk, Jessica said, and I could hear her working to keep her voice steady. A necessary talk. About what? Jessica looked at me and I nodded slightly. If she wanted to rebuild trust, transparency with Marcus would be a good place to start. About things I said and did that hurt your mother, Jessica said carefully. Things I need to make amends for. Marcus looked confused, but he didn't press for details. Perhaps he sensed that this was between Jessica and me, or perhaps he simply didn't want to know the specifics of what had gone wrong. The rest of their visit passed pleasantly but with an undertone of change that everyone seemed to feel. Marcus was more attentive to my stories about Portland life, asking questions that suggested he was genuinely trying to understand my decision to move rather than simply accepting it. Jessica was quieter but more present, engaging in conversations that weren't about logistics or needs. On Easter Sunday, we attended church together, a small Episcopal congregation that Claire had introduced me to, where the liturgy was traditional but the community was warmly welcoming. Emma charmed the elderly parishioners during coffee hour, and I felt proud to introduce my family to the people who'd become important in my new life. Your granddaughter is beautiful, said Margaret Foster, an 85-year-old former librarian who sat near me during services. And your son and daughter-in-law seem lovely. They are, I agreed, and realized I meant it despite everything that had transpired. Monday morning came too soon. As we stood in the hotel lobby saying goodbye, Emma fussed in her car seat, perhaps sensing the change in mood around her. Thank you for a wonderful visit, Marcus said, hugging me tightly. I understand better now why you love it here. You're welcome back anytime, I assured him. All of you. Jessica's goodbye was more tentative. Margaret, thank you for being honest with me yesterday. I know I have a lot of work to do. Take care of yourself, I said. And take care of Emma. We will. And Margaret, I'm going to call you next week. Not because I need anything, just to talk. I'd like that, I said, and found that I meant it. After they left, I walked along the riverfront, processing the weekend and what it might mean for our future relationship. The conversation with Jessica had been more productive than I dared hope, but I remained cautious about reading too much into one moment of honesty. Change was possible, but it would have to be proven over time, through actions rather than words. And regardless of whether Jessica followed through on her promises, I knew I would be fine. I'd built a life that was complete without their constant presence, fulfilling without their approval, joyful without their needs driving my decisions. 6 months later, Jessica had kept her promise about calling weekly, and our conversations had gradually evolved from stilted politeness to something approaching genuine friendship. She'd started sending me photos of Emma's milestones without being asked, and when Emma took her first steps in October, Jessica called me immediately, instead of waiting for our scheduled Sunday conversation. She walked right toward the camera when I was trying to video call you. Jessica laughed. It's like she knew you were supposed to see it happen. These small gestures meant more to me than grand proclamations of change, because they suggested Jessica was learning to include me in their lives naturally rather than strategically. The real test came in November, when Jessica called with unexpected news. Margaret, I have something to tell you, and I hope you'll consider it carefully before you respond. I'm listening. Marcus got a job offer, a really good one, with a tech company in Seattle. We'd be moving in January. My first thought was selfish. They'd be only 3 hours away instead of 15, close enough for weekend visits and spontaneous trips. My second thought was more analytical. This could be Jessica's way of trying to rebuild our relationship through proximity. What does Marcus think about the opportunity? I asked. He's excited about the work, but he's worried about leaving California. All his friends, his job security, the life we've built there. And what do you think? I think it might be good for us, Jessica said carefully. All of us. Emma would grow up closer to you, and maybe we could work on building the kind of relationship we should have had all along. Jessica, I need to ask you something, and I want a completely honest answer. Okay. Is moving to Seattle contingent on me changing my will? There was a long pause. No, she said finally. I mean, would I like financial security for Emma's future? Of course. But Marcus will take this job regardless of your estate planning. This is about Emma knowing her grandmother, and about me having the chance to prove I can be the daughter-in-law you deserved. And if I never change the will, then I'll have to accept that some consequences can't be undone, Jessica said. But I'd rather have a real relationship with you, and no inheritance, than no relationship and no inheritance. It was the right answer, though I remained cautious about believing it completely. When do you need to decide? I asked. Marcus has to give them an answer by December 1st. Then you should take the job, I said. Not because of me, but because it sounds like a good opportunity for your family. Really? Really? And Jessica? I'm proud of you for making this decision based on what's right for your family rather than trying to manipulate the outcome with me. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. That means more than you know. After we hung up, I sat in my reading chair watching the late afternoon light fade over the river and feeling something I hadn't experienced in years. Cautious optimism about my relationship with Jessica. She'd made mistakes, serious ones that had damaged our trust and changed our family dynamics permanently. But she was also doing the hard work of acknowledging those mistakes and changing her behavior. Whether that effort would be enough to rebuild what we'd lost remained to be seen. What I knew for certain was that I would never again sacrifice my own well-being for someone else's convenience. I would never again allow myself to be diminished by people who confused love with obligation. I had learned to value myself appropriately, and that knowledge was unshakable. The dead weight had discovered it was actually the anchor, and now it was choosing where to let itself be planted. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.